Hello, and welcome to a presentation on Mastering the Art of Group Instruction. I'm Polly Abbott. I started my career with a degree in education and was briefly a classroom teacher. I then moved on to get postgraduate certificates for vision rehabilitation therapy and orientation and mobility. And since then, I have over 20 years experience providing group presentations, workshops, and intensive small group instruction on a wide variety of topics in both VRT and O&M. I believe that there is an art to doing group instruction and to doing it well. A lead instructor is always trying to balance the needs of the group versus the expectations of the individual and their own goals as an instructor in terms of what they wish to impart to the participants in the group in terms of skills or increased knowledge. Group events, rather than individual instruction, can often work in ways that one-on-one instruction sometimes cannot. When an individual is alone with an instructor, all the focus is on them. This may be a little bit stressful for some individuals. Whereas we know in a group situation, the pressure is off, so to speak, and the individual may feel a little more relaxed and receptive to new ideas and to try new things. Group events can do two things. They can be used to raise awareness and entice consumers to do something or try something new. They serve the purpose of exciting the consumer's interest in the topic. They can learn what is possible if they get more training. Also, you can give them a taste of what they could learn. If they try it and realize maybe it's not so hard, they're going to gain confidence that they can handle it and hopefully pursue it. So they're learning what is possible. And of course, group events are there to enhance skills and raise motivation. They're going to experience stimulation to keep using the skill or to build on it. Participating in skill building events are going to increase their confidence as they may find themselves supporting other participants, which may make them realize that they know more than they thought they did. And they may experience motivation to advance their abilities through interaction with others. For example, they may think that they have performed the skill to the highest ability, but then they're going to see someone who is doing it even better, and this may raise in their minds the belief that there's more that they can do too. There are two basic approaches to offering content at a group event, and by that I mean simply what you're planning to teach. The first one is to focus on one skill area, but then cover multiple applications of using that skill in daily life. For example, if we talk about self-advocacy skills, you could ask them to learn how to ask directions from a doctor, from strangers, from different people. The other approach is to focus on one situation from daily life, but then cover multiple skills needed to address the situation successfully. For example, going to the doctor. You would be addressing strategies for note-taking, calendar keeping, but also those same self-advocacy skills in terms of talking to the doctor, asking for directions at the medical facility, and so on. As vision rehabilitation professionals, we know that our training and our experience is usually directed at working one-on-one with individuals. There's a few concepts around changing that focus to one of bringing the same information to a group that I would like to talk about. The first concept is that any topic that you would teach an individual can be adapted for a group in some way. The intensity of hands-on experience for the individual is dependent in a group setting on what resources are available to you. So there's definitely an element of flexibility that a professional has to keep in mind. Very important too is the idea that it is the responsibility of the vision rehab professional to make decisions on how the topic will be presented, with safety really as the primary consideration, and then the quality of the learning or the experience for the individual participant as the second. Lastly, Keep in mind that the ability to effectively conduct group learning is an extension of the skill set that's used for individual instruction. So when we work with individuals, we are doing the same sorts of activities all the time. We're doing introductions. We're making sure that they feel comfortable and are ready to learn. We're presenting new material. We're reviewing it to see what they've learned and evaluate their skills. And then we're talking about the future. Working with a group is following the same sort of procedure, except that there is added in a lot of extra planning and considerations for dealing with group dynamics that's a little bit different. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to define the different styles or types of group instruction by the following terms. Your place of work might have different words for them. The first is presentation. This is an event where there is minimal interaction with individual consumers and the leader or presenter. That also means that there's zero opportunity really to measure any kind of skill acquisition. These events are highly informational and may include demonstrations of equipment. You're showing information, you're not really expecting the individual members of the group to demonstrate anything. Second is workshop. This is probably a smaller group. The focus is to impart some new information or skill acquisition, and the leader or instructor is going to find time to have individual interaction with the participants to some degree. Last is class, probably a much smaller group, although not always. Here the focus is completely about skill acquisition for the participants. The lead instructor is trying to give them an experience that is close to individual instruction, but in a group setting. As I've stated, any skill area or topic can be adapted for group instruction. I wanted to give you an example of what that would look like. Let's take the example of teaching human guide to multiple people. If this topic were delivered in a presentation format, there wouldn't be a lot of activity with the group. I would most likely be describing the technique, discussing the benefits of using the technique, and finding any participants who use some part of the technique or all of it to share personal experiences on how it's improved daily activities. If I were using this topic in a workshop, I would definitely be including discussion points from the presentation, but I would add in more hands-on practice. I would have to look at the available space and see if we had enough guides to build in as much hands-on as I could. Although in terms of monitoring for skill development, there wouldn't be as much time to check in with each person. In a class setting, I would take this topic and do my best to ensure that every participant had enough room to practice the skill, and I would certainly be monitoring every participant for the technique. The goal would be for them to acquire the ability to do human guide, the same as they would if I was teaching them individually. Benefits and challenges of group instruction. There are benefits to conducting group events, but it's also prudent to consider some of the challenges. There are benefits to you as a vision rehab professional if you offer group training events. The first is, when you bring people together, they're going to naturally talk and share all of the things that they do to stay independent. And you might discover some new strategies that you can share in turn with the next consumer that you work with. So your body of knowledge will grow. Second, when you bring people together, it does allow you to address the frequent issue of social isolation. Not everyone likes to attend a support group, and yet in group training, they may feel a similar sense of support that will help them inch towards their next stage of adjustment to vision loss. And as we know, the further a person is along that path, the easier it is for us as professionals to help them take that next step towards independence. They'll be more open and receptive to what we have to offer. And lastly, it's a way to maximize your time, your energy, and your resources to serve more clients at once. So instead of traveling around to teach the same basic or foundational skills to 10 different clients, you would gather all of them together at once, introduce those skills, and then that will save you that teaching time for later on. The benefits of offering group instruction make it sound great, but let's talk about some of the challenges. You may find it hard to schedule a time when everyone can attend the group event or to schedule the transportation for participants. There may be limitations that have to do with the location. For example, you want to teach a cooking class, but the community facility doesn't really have a kitchen that's ideal. Or there might be costs that you need to pay that your budget does not allow for. There's also a greater burden of planning and organization that you have to do versus the amount of time you're going to spend in direct instruction. And I would say it's greater for groups in terms of time than it is for working with individuals. You may need extra assistance when you do group instruction. So you might have to scale back if you have a lack of assistance, or you may need to build in extra time to train those assistants to make the group instruction go well. You may not be confident yet in your ability to lead the group. You may have underdeveloped leadership skills, although hopefully today's presentation will give you some confidence and strategies. Many professionals shy away initially from doing group instruction because of safety concerns. And lastly, planning with Murphy's Law in effect. Anytime you're planning a group instruction, you have to think of Murphy's Law, which states if anything can go wrong, it probably will. This is something to make peace with if you intend to enjoy group instruction. Truly, it's the benefits for participants that make all the effort worthwhile. There are many benefits for participants. They gain an awareness of what's possible, and this gives them choice in what they wish to pursue. They will gain inspiration and motivation from being around their peers. They'll acquire new skills, they may master a skill, and they're going to experience peer support, which can be very motivating. They'll probably also find new social connections. They're participating in things that are a common interest and that hopefully and frequently leads to new friends. Lastly, group events may assist with adjustment to vision loss. They're in the group and they may find themselves in a situation where they can support one of their peers. And there is nothing better than this for convincing someone that they have learned and they have grown and that they are further along their path to adjustment to vision loss. Challenges for participants. Sometimes participants don't enjoy their group experience and find themselves feeling frustrated. It could be due to their expectations to have more time to practice the skill. They might be frustrated or irritated with the behavior of other people in the group. They may find it difficult to learn if the group leader is disorganized or is not pacing the instruction carefully, or if there is a lack of clear instructions and they're just not sure what they're supposed to be doing. They may find that there is a lack of response to their individual needs or a lack of feedback on how they're doing with the new skill that they're trying to acquire. They may be concerned about a reduction in their safety if they don't get enough time one-on-one with the instructor. And lastly, some individuals find participation in workshops just too exhausting. If the workshop is too long, or if they've had a long journey to get there on public transit or paratransit, they may have a lot of difficulty hearing, and the effort of straining to hear is particularly tiring. Or it may simply be the anxiety of being in an unfamiliar environment with unfamiliar people that makes them find group experiences just a little too much. So how do you know when you're conducting a successful event? One of the first indicators is that you start and end it on time. And this is more important than what you might expect. It demonstrates in a very basic way that you are prepared and you are planned. And this will give people a sense of confidence in everything else that you do. You'll see that they appear comfortable in the environment, and they'll feel calm because you'll have told them what to expect. This shows that you really do respect the whole group experience. You're going to deliver information in a way that is neither too fast or too slow, again, recognizing that the group needs to move as one. You build in time for discussion and sharing so that you have learning that actually occurs. And you'll notice that this is so because questions and comments will stay on topic. People will evidently be engaged in what you're doing. And you'll lead the discussion and you will make sure that things stay on topic because you are respecting the individuals within the group and what they hope to get out of that group training. And lastly, everyone goes home without any injuries and with smiles on their faces. And keep in mind that whatever your expectations as the professional, that people sometimes get out of these group events something unexpected that you didn't plan for, but will be no less valuable to them. How to develop a group event. How do you do all of this? First, we'll take a look at the steps for developing and planning group instruction events, and then we'll cover some specific group leadership skills. Here are some steps to follow when developing a successful group training experience. This presentation mainly will deal with steps 1 to 4. Step 1, choose the topic or skill area that you want to address based on input from your consumers, and don't be afraid to include your professional opinion as you make that selection. And then when you want to promote that event and get people to sign up, try to think like an advertiser for what you are selling. Give it a catchy title and be careful with what words you use to describe what you're trying to offer. Step 2, decide on the style of group event. Is this going to be best as a presentation, a workshop, or a class? And do this by considering the purpose of the event. Are you trying to entice people into doing something new or make them aware about something? Or do you really feel there's a need for instruction and skill development? Part of this is taking into consideration what resources are available to you to help with that decision. Step 3, plan the group event down to the last detail, including Plan B. Plan B is deciding ahead of time what you're going to do if something doesn't happen the way you expect it to. For example, you decide to do a presentation and you think that maybe 15 people show up and then you end up getting 30, or you end up getting only 2. Step 4, conduct the group event using group leadership skills. So you're doing this with an approach that is designed to keep respect for the whole comfort of all those people as much as supporting the individual within that experience. And step 5, try to always do a follow-up of some sort to see what people learned, how they felt about the experience, and this will lead you to plan for the next one perhaps in a different way. There's always room for improvement, even if you've done the same presentation or workshop multiple times. It's very helpful during the planning process to take into consideration the principles of adult learning theory. Remember that adults are goal-oriented and they're commonly self-motivated. This means that they don't always enjoy learning just for the sake of learning. They want to use that information in some way. The learning, therefore, has to be relevant to their life or situation. So if you're providing examples, make sure it fits with what your audience has experienced. Don't forget that they're also living their life as part of a larger family or friend group. This group may be influencing them either positively or negatively in terms of what their goals or level of motivation is. And lastly, group participants, whatever their age, want to enjoy the experience of learning. There's actually been research which has shown that if you enjoy the experience of learning, you will retain that information better than if you did not enjoy that time in the class. Picking the topic. Start with relevance. Ask yourself, what do people commonly need to do every day or even once in a while, such as hosting a party? This is adult learning theory in action. Then consider your client requests. Look for commonalities and pay attention to instruction requests for the same topic. This is consumer input and choice in action. Lastly, ask yourself, don't hesitate to insert your professional opinion. You have knowledge and experience that your consumers may not have acquired yet. So what do you know about what is important for people to experience or to be aware of that could be offered in a group training experience? Speaking of relevance, here's an example from my own career. Every year around holiday time, when family and friends would tend to gather and holiday parties would be held, I'd start to notice that the consumers I worked with would all be commenting on stress over attending or hosting parties or spending time with friends and family. They would all be expressing similar concerns, such as going to parties and having whoever they were with kind of park them in a corner and them feeling like they couldn't mingle due to their vision impairment. They'd be expressing concern over the chaos in the kitchen that they couldn't manage with people trying to help and creating a lot of disorganization and stress for them. Or they would simply be wondering how can they maneuver in a crowd when they're trying to carry a drink, an hors d'oeuvre, and use a white cane at the same time. At the time, I ended up responding in 3 different ways. First, I held just a general presentation to see who was interested in talking more about the topic of holiday parties. I led a group discussion, and we discussed all of the common concerns that they were having and shared some tips on strategies to address them. We didn't do any hands-on training, but people felt very invigorated by all of the new ideas and tips that got shared. At that large group event, it also allowed me to advertise for workshops where we would be focusing on just one skill. These workshops attracted a smaller crowd from the original one from the presentation, but it allowed us to do some more hands-on demonstration, some role-playing. We chose to do a workshop on dining skills that didn't actually have a whole lot of food involved, and we practiced self-advocacy and some human guide, all as it related to being at a party. And from those set of workshops, there was a much smaller crowd that wanted intensive hands-on instruction. So we did do dining skills workshops so that people could get more instruction on how to perform those skills with a full meal. And we did some cooking classes that related to preparing holiday foods. I will say that I could have chosen just to do the presentation and stop there. But I had the time and I had assistance, and so we offered all 3 levels on around the same theme. As you're deciding whether to offer a workshop or a class, you're also deciding how much or how little of a skill you wish to teach. Most workshops and classes, depending on the size of the group, just don't have enough time to teach all of a skill to mastery. Start by identifying any risk factors associated with hands-on components of the skill, and consider the safety of the client after the workshop is over. You want to make sure that they know very clearly what the workshop will teach and what they will be safe doing. For example, if you're teaching someone how to slice a vegetable and their goal is to cook a meal, you'll need to be clear that after the workshop they'll be safe slicing, but they'll need to contact you to learn how to saute that vegetable on a stovetop. Your familiarity with participants will also impact the intensity of the instruction you feel comfortable offering. If you have worked with the individuals before and you're familiar with your skill level, you'll likely be able to offer them something that's more challenging. Lastly, what is your own capacity for monitoring each participant in the group? This really is a skill that you'll develop, and it relates to your own professional comfort level as well. The more you work with groups, the more comfortable you'll be working with more people when dealing with some of these higher risk skills. You'll find your own strategies for making sure that everyone is safe. Let's discuss this some more with a cooking class as an example. I remember starting out planning my first cooking class and feeling a whole lot of enthusiasm for what we were cooking. As I thought about the tools that we would need, like a knife, a box grater, a peeler, a can opener, and then the use of the stovetop, everything seemed to be sharp, pointy, and hot, and it started to give me real concern for how I was going to monitor and manage everyone's safety. I made a list of all of the tools, and then I started to find strategies for addressing those with higher risk factors. For example, I decided that while I would be instructing someone who hadn't had much experience using a box grater, I was going to let the other class participants do something like wash the vegetables or other prep work that was not going to put them in any kind of danger, so that I would feel comfortable keeping my attention on the student who was new to the higher risk skill. I also brought in another pair of eyeballs. I had an assistant that I had trained who had an interest in cooking that was just going to be there to help me keep an eye on things. In terms of monitoring for safety, it really did help that I was familiar with some of the participants in that first class. Subsequently, after that first class, I made it a prerequisite for any group cooking classes that people had to have either prior experience working one-on-one with me, or they had to book a consultation, so that when they came into the group class, I would have some familiarity with their abilities. I also made sure that every participant of the group cooking class received an offer of individual instruction after the class. And this was really helpful for a lot of people. A lot of people signed up because they were enthusiastic, but others just knew they hadn't learned everything that they wanted to learn in order to feel confident performing some of those skills. We did a satisfaction survey, and that really helped with the planning of the next class. Up till now, I've been talking about workshops and presentations that you're conducting in your own space, or at least one that you're very familiar with. But as vision rehab professionals, we often get invitations from community partners, usually support groups, to come out and provide some kind of presentation or workshop or even classes. And here it's important to be able to adjust the instruction and the content to fit the space and the resources that are available in those groups. This means that you can't always do everything, and largely what you do offer is a negotiation between yourself and the host in terms of what the expectations are around what you're going to do. Most places really hope that their group members will come away with some kind of skill acquisition, but this may not always be possible depending upon how they're willing to work with you to make sure that that happens. I just want to touch on 3 different groups that I've worked with in the past to show how expectations and resources can be very, very different. I was often asked to teach dining skills. One of the groups that made this request was a support group that regularly had 50 people showing up, but they had a large budget, a very large room, and an absolute army of volunteers. And so one year we were able to provide a 100% hands-on group training event with every person eating exactly the same meal. They were able to adjust the time so that it was around a lunchtime. I had time to train the volunteers in terms of what they were looking for, and it turned out to be a very successful event. And surveys afterwards showed that the participants did continue to use some of the skills that they had learned that day. Another group wanted dining skills, but there was no budget to offer a meal, and the room was really, really small. And so in this case, I worked with the participants to have a potluck. So everyone came and brought a certain dish, and I had worked out ahead of time that none of the dishes were allowed to be finger food, because the whole point of the workshop was to get everyone feeling more comfortable using their knife and fork and reaching for their drinks without knocking anything over. And lastly, I also had a support group of about 15 to 20 people request something on dining skills, but they were not able to be flexible in terms of time, and their meeting time was 10 o'clock in the morning until about 11 o'clock. completely in between any normal dining time. So we worked with them to provide some hands-on skills with everybody just using a plastic cup, a paper plate, and utensils. And then since they normally had cake and coffee, they had to eat their cake that day with a knife and fork if they wished time to practice the skills that I had introduced. So that was a way we were flexible but still meet the expectations of the community host. Working with community partners often involves managing their expectations and doing a little bit of negotiation as you try to balance safety and what the topic is and what their expectations are. So I highly recommend that before you agree to come out and do anything with the group, have a good conversation with that community host and find out just what their expectations are. They may just want a speaker because they always have a speaker once a month, or they may be truly invested in trying to give their group members some actual skill development. And once you know that, then you can start planning how you're going to do it and what you can offer and agree to do. I always like to check out how big the space is and what features it might have, because that really determines how many people can participate depending on what you want to do. If I know the group, that's great, but if I don't, I'm going to want to find out who is participating. For example, are they people who regularly come to that location and will be comfortable in that setting? Or is this a first-time event where the host is really trying to attract a new crowd of new people? How much time do you have, and is the start or end time flexible? I've noticed over the years that groups will often meet for 1.5 to 2 hours, but they've already built in a social component where the beginning half hour or the end half hour is just purely a social time. So you'll want to find out how much time they truly need you or will give you in order to do the presentation or workshop, because the group members guaranteed will still be expecting that social time. And if this is the case, how much time do you realistically need as the instructor to actually teach them something if that is the expectation? You may have to teach less in order to impart a higher acquisition of skills to the group. It just really depends. Do your best to focus on the priorities. What is the priority of the host in terms of their expectations, and also be realistic with your own priority in terms of feeling like you have, if you're teaching something, that you are able to teach it well. When we talked about challenges for participants, many I mentioned were related to poorly run groups. Let's cover some group leadership skills and some specific techniques that'll help you make everybody happy when they're participating in your workshop or class. As much as possible, try to start planning every detail of the event well in advance of the actual day. Accept that you are in charge of the whole thing, so consider how people will be welcomed, how you might have to orient them to the space, and all the other details that will go into making it an overall pleasant experience for them. I like to visualize my events as if I were watching a movie when I'm in the planning stages, because this helps me picture what I might be saying, where the participants will be, and how I'm going to orchestrate any sort of movement that needs to happen in that space in a way that allows it to flow and to keep everybody safe. I think about how I'm going to pace the instruction in terms of alternating between times when I'm talking and times when I'm asking them to perform the different skills or to just do something. I'm also considering my plan B in terms of what I'm going to have happen if things don't go as expected. Oftentimes you will get 2 people showing up when you expected a larger group and vice versa. So you have to consider what your backup might be if you need certain supplies to conduct this particular event. As the speaker or the instructor of the group, it is your responsibility to get everyone's attention and set the tone for the rest of the workshop. By tone, you can think of the atmosphere in the room. Are you okay if it's boisterous? Do you want it calm? Do you want it serious? You are the one who sets that. and you do it by how you greet the crowd. The words you choose to say and the tone of your voice make an impact. So try to be upbeat, have a smile on your face, and that will go a long way to helping people feel happy and positive about being in the room. Getting everyone's attention can often seem like a challenge, so I wanted to share the technique that I use. People need time to finish what they're doing, stop thinking about what they're thinking about, and give you their attention. So to allow them to do this, I usually greet them multiple times if necessary. So for example, I'll greet the room and say, "Good morning, can everyone hear me?" And if I don't get more than half the room becoming quiet, after I've waited for 20 seconds or so, I'm going to say something else, such as, "Good morning, I'd like to get started." And usually by this time, people have pretty much stopped their conversations and realized that I am not going to start speaking until everyone else has finished their conversations. And this is important for the group to know, because they will have confidence that they're not going to miss anything that they want to learn if you are the sort of instructor that really does gently and politely command everyone's attention. This makes for a better experience for everyone. As it often takes a little time for people to give you their full attention, I think it's helpful to do the housekeeping announcements before anything else, especially since you'll want to ask everyone to turn off their cell phones, and this usually causes a bit of a rustle in the room and some noise. Once you have this completed, people will be ready to give you their full attention. And if you're doing a workshop where you're asking people to introduce themselves, this will also make sure that any participants in the group have the group's attention. This will create more of an atmosphere of mutual respect. If you follow that technique for introducing yourselves and truly waiting for the room to be quiet if someone is speaking, workshops that you offer where you're alternating between giving instructions and then asking the participants to go off and practice on their own will go much easier, because they will be in the habit of stopping what they're doing and listening to your next set of instructions. And that's really important for your stress level, but also for the overall quality of the group experience. During the first few moments of the workshop or class or presentation, you're also setting the group at ease. They're listening to your friendly tone of voice, and they're learning some information about what is about to happen. I would recommend describing whatever the basic agenda for the workshop is going to be. For example, for today's dining skills workshop, we will all start by talking about some common challenges, such as reaching for drinks without knocking them over. Then we'll practice some specific skills. Each of you has a place setting with a slice of bread to stand in for your meat and some water in your glass. After some practice, lunch will be served at noon, and you're welcome to ask questions anytime. With this kind of statement, you're letting everybody know that they're going to have a chance to give input to the workshop as they talk about common challenges. They're going to get a little hands-on practice right away as you mention asking them to reach for drinks without knocking them over. And then you're also describing a little bit about the environment in the sense that they have a place setting in front of them. And then lastly, you're giving them a description of how the time will be used. You're letting them know there will be instruction, then there will be some practice, and then they know when their lunch will be served. And they also get to tell you anytime they have questions, which really relates to adult learning theory, where they feel in control about what they are doing and how they are learning. Conducting introductions is more than just the sharing of names and some background information about grandchildren or place where you live. As an instructor, it's really an important opportunity to get information from the participants so that you can confirm what their expectations are for the workshop or class or presentation that day. And it's also a chance to share your connection to the topic and begin developing some rapport with them. Introductions, as they go around and tell a little bit about themselves, will also provide that same opportunity for them to develop peer-to-peer rapport development and a sense of connection. So when you're doing introductions, request that participants share one specific piece of information that relates to the topic along with their name. If you take that approach, you'll be able to get the information that will be helpful and allow people to contribute in a way that doesn't have them oversharing or undersharing. For example, if you're conducting a workshop on the different strategies for taking down information that's important, you might request that everyone say their name and then share what they're currently doing whenever their doctor wants to give them the phone number of a specialist. And as people go around and talk about how they're doing, what they're doing, everyone else in the group is going to probably hear that everyone is having the same issues. And so this opens the door for you to focus the content of the workshop and make sure that the content that you have prepared matches what the participants are saying in sharing in that moment. After introductions and housekeeping, but before you start conducting the workshop or class, it's important to have that discussion about safety with the group. Some of them might be feeling hesitant or a bit nervous about what you're going to ask them to do. So I'm going to share a phrase that I heard recently when I was on a plane. The flight attendant was giving the safety talk at the beginning, and it seemed to me that they were starting a lot of phrases with the words, "in the unlikely event," and then they would go on to talk about crash landings. I thought to myself, though, this is a very useful phrase. It sets people at ease, but it opens the door to anything serious that you might need to talk about in terms of safety. Part of the safety talk with your group participants is letting them know that there are things that could be dangerous that they might not be aware of. For example, in cooking classes, you'll probably want to talk about how they'll need to communicate when they are moving and where they're moving to in the class, particularly if they are transporting a sharp knife to the kitchen sink to be washed. And you'll have to tell them what will be the safest way for them to do that. You, as the vision rehab professional, will also need to have a plan in place for any participants who might have a medical emergency. This is often as simple as making sure that you have an emergency contact name and number for every participant that you can gather during the registration process. And you might also make sure that you have a second staff member who's kind of on call if you need them to handle any emergencies that come up. There's going to need to be more than one person. You need to have someone who can look after the larger group, but also look after the individual who is having the medical difficulty. Sometimes it will be so extreme, if you have to call the ambulance, that it will bring everything to a halt. But for lesser emergencies or unexpected things that crop up where someone in the group needs some assistance that has nothing to do with the workshop, it's really handy to have some backup on staff. You'll need to talk about safety specific to learning in the environment that the participants will need to practice or be aware of. For example, if you're conducting a workshop or class where you may have more than one person participating in higher risk activities at the same time, you might want to establish a signal for the whole group to alert them to an action that you want them to do. For example, if you are conducting an indoor mobility workshop where maybe you're teaching multiple people to move around trailing walls or doing self-protective techniques in different parts of the room, you may wish to have an auditory signal like a single hand clap that you'll do to get everyone's attention quickly. And this can also be used if you notice that something unexpected and dangerous might be about to happen and you need everyone just to freeze and stop what they're doing right then and there. And so in the beginning of the workshop, set that up and talk about it with everyone. Get them to agree that this is the action that they will do when you give a particular signal and that they know it's for their own safety. Lastly, emphasize the importance of listening when the instructor speaks because it may concern their safety. Again, this relates to the practices you set up right when you did the introduction, getting them used to stopping and listening when you speak. Granted, when you are in a workshop, they're going to hear you talking to other individuals as you instruct one-on-one as part of the larger group experience. But there is a voice you can use. I tend to think of it as my teacher voice. This is the attention-getting voice with the phrase such as, please stop for a minute, please listen, that will let them know it's time for them to give you their attention. Discuss that with the group. You can get them to agree how they would like to have everyone's attention gathered and what you will say. And once you set that up, your group will be much safer and, again, more comfortable for everyone to be participating in. A group leadership skill that's important is keeping the group focused. If a group is unfocused, you'll notice blank stares, you'll notice little impatient rustlings in the room. You may even hear sidebar conversations. You'll just get that sense that they're not really paying attention. Or if you're teaching a skill-based workshop or class, you may notice that people aren't even really doing what you ask them to do. They're just talking about other things. So what do you do in that situation? I would say start strong. Work to create a sense of connection to the topic from the very beginning. This is adult learning theory, remember? So try to use humor or short anecdotes, but use them carefully. Try not to overuse them. But people listen more easily to stories than they do to just simple explanations of information. Another thing you can do is to incorporate movement or action with the participants as much as possible. This doesn't mean to stop what you're saying and just ask everyone to stand up and then sit down to wake them up. You want to ask them to do something that relates to the topic. Is there anything that they can try while they're still sitting in their seats? Or do you have time to ask a question to get them to think of an answer and then respond? So that's particularly helpful if you're in a workshop and you have to initially get their attention back, but then you refocus them on the topic by asking that question and getting them to listen to each other's responses. Sometimes if you're losing focus, it just means that you've been talking a while and it's time to give someone else a turn so that they can refocus on someone else's voice. And lastly, just in general, pay attention to your speaking rate and adjust it to suit your audience as much as possible. For example, with older adults, it can be helpful to speak just a little bit more slowly. Although don't make the mistake I once made where I had been doing a lot of presentations at senior living facilities and then ended up in front of an audience of young professionals. And I noticed a lot of blank stares and realized, oh, I have to pick up the pace because this group can handle a faster rate of speaking. There are certain things you should consider in terms of how you deliver information so that you can facilitate learning. For example, consider planning multiple activities that practice the same skill. If you keep the activity relevant to real life, you're going to find that there's lots of opportunities and that greater sense of, connection and relevancy that adults need. For example, you might be teaching them how to use 3 fingers to tactually punch buttons on any kind of keypad. So you'll have them practice on a calculator, a TV remote, a microwave. It may feel different to the participants as if you are asking them to do certain things, even though you know it is exactly the same skill or technique. But the participants will get more out of it because each of those devices with a keypad have a connection and a relevancy to what they're doing in daily life. Think too about how we all have different preferences for learning modes. Some people are auditory or tactual or kinetic learners. So pay attention to what you are saying and how you're delivering it for the auditory learners. Include the tactual learners by giving people opportunity to touch and feel and experience through their senses. And then kinetic learners learn best by doing. So make sure there's a certain amount of movement or physical participation as much as possible. And lastly, always include some time for question and answer and discussion. This allows each participant within that group to start developing their own personal sense of connection to the material that they are learning. And that way, with that connection, they'll remember it longer. Pacing of the instruction. All good group events have some back and forth between the leader talking and engagement from the group. So try to pause the instruction for practice time or discussion. And you can do this in different ways. You can periodically stop sharing information in order to use little quiz questions to check that the group is with you and that they're absorbing the information. You want to build in a little time for reteaching in case you notice that the group hasn't absorbed what you've been trying to teach them and you have to present it again, but in a slightly different way. And balance group versus individual instruction as much as possible. So for example, you might give a set of instructions to the group in terms of what they're about to do, let them do it, but then during the practice time of the larger group, go to each individual and check in with them and see how they're doing, and that will give yourself the opportunity to provide some individual instruction. When it comes time to end the workshop, you'll want to review the key points. Repetition is always good for learning. However, if you as the leader are the one who is doing all the talking as you give that review, you're probably missing an opportunity to find out what the group has learned that day. So I'd encourage you to solicit the group for that kind of information. Ask them a question about what they felt the best takeaway was, or what was the best strategy or tip that they learned that they intend to use and why. You can springboard off their comments to ensure that all the key points do get covered. When possible, also provide additional resources to help them continue to engage with that topic in the future. And lastly, end on time, and do so in a way that feels official, so that anybody who wants to leave knows that that it's okay for them to leave. You can say something that will let people know they're free to leave, but also let people know who still may have questions and want to do some discussion, know that if they wait a few minutes, they'll be able to continue doing that. And speaking of ending workshops, we are coming to the close of this one. I have a few points that I hope you will remember from today. The first is try to plan for the whole experience, not just the content that you will teach. Manage expectations for what the group event will entail for the participants, the community partners, and of course your own expectations of what you want to have happen as a vision rehabilitation professional. Know that you will always be in the act of adjusting the style of presentation to fit the space and the people. You'll have to keep in mind whether you're trying just to entice and impart knowledge or whether you want to instruct and impart skills. And if you can't adjust the style to fit the space, you may have to adjust the number of participants based on what resources you have available. Thank you for attending today's webinar. I hope you have found some new strategies for leading groups that will inspire you to try doing more and developing those group leadership skills that are so essential for creating a wonderful learning experience for more than one individual at a time. My name again is Polly Abbott, and I'm with the OIB-TAC Center. And I will post my email in the chat. It is pabbott@colled.msstate.edu. Thank you.